to the Faith Science Podcast. My name is Tyler Bublitz, and welcome back to the first Sunday of Advent for the week of December 1st, 2024. I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to begin this week's podcast, and Happy New Year. Happy new church year. This is such an exciting time of year where we're moving into that new church year. It's the year of Luke this year, which is a really fun time, I think. And I always enjoy Advent. I'm probably a little biased based on that my birthday is in Advent, but I also enjoy this time of year. I enjoy the Thanksgiving to Christmas time of year because I do really believe that there is more joy present. I feel like people take a moment and reflect just that little bit more and are able to really expose more of who they are. And I think sometimes it's very difficult to do that. I know as a child I saw it a lot more, and I feel like I have to keep reminding myself to get to that place during Advent. But I think it's such an important place, and it's a magical time, but it's also a time of a lot of joy. I think true joy and in the anticipation, in the preparation. There is a lot of joy that can be had, and I think it's easy for us to get curmudgeon-like and really get during all the things instead of really truly feeling the joy that comes because of the new year. So let's just jump into the question that we had for last week, which was, what did you learn this last year in your faith? We talked about, as we were transitioning into the new church year, what did you learn? And I think we got a really good answer from one of our loyal listeners in talking about how there's been some difficult things in this last year and learning to be tolerant of people. But I liked kind of the last part of it and talking about how there's been some challenging things. But this final phrase was tough but good. And I think that's one of the things as people of faith we should be somewhat striving for. Yes, there's going to be highlights. Yes, there's going to be lowlights. Yes, there's going to be challenging times. But tough, but good, I think in a lot of ways is exactly what we should be striving for. If it was easy, how much should we really learn? If we still recognize that in the tough, difficult things that it was still good, I think we have accomplished something and really have moved forward. And I will admit there's been definitely some tough things and that I'm still going through this year. But I also believe that as I continue and I think as people continue to work through the tough and keep our eyes fixated on the good of who God is, we actually do really make progress and really do figure out and are able to better understand a little bit more of where God is taking us. So this is kind of a fun part of the year because now we are back to 4 readings at least this week. And I think it's kind of fun just to have where it's a little bit more condensed so we can get into a little bit more discussion here at the back end. So let's just jump into it. The Old Testament text this week is out of Jeremiah chapter 33, verses 14 to 16. This is, again, we have to remember that Advent is about preparing us for Christmas. So again, a lot of these readings that we're going to be getting is talking about and helping us spiritually prepare for what is coming and reminding us of the past and the history that has gotten us to this point. So coming straight here out of Jeremiah, it's recognizing that the Lord is going to fulfill the promise that has been made to the house of Israel and the house of Judah, and that out of the righteous branch, spring of David, there will be this person or this rising up, per se. And remember, as we're on this side of the cross, it's easy for us to connect the dots. But again, as Jeremiah is saying this is definitely would have been hard to fully grasp. In the days, Judah will be saved and Jerusalem will live safely, and there's this person of righteousness that is coming. The psalm that goes with that is Psalm 25, the first 10 verses of it. And this is a psalm of trust, recognizing the love and faithfulness that God has for us, but also recognizing that as we continue to trust, as we continue to lean into God, we recognize that God is going to continue to steer us to where we need to be, that we are leaning heavier and heavier and heavier on who God is. And in that, we recognize that we have a God who does love us, who does forgive us, who does try to steer us as long as we are willing and able to not only recognize that, but also acknowledge it and turn into it so that we can continue to grow and learn that love and learn the character of who God is to us. The New Testament text, the epistle text this week, is out of 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, verses 9 to 13. This is the text where through the strengthening of our hearts that we are thankful. We have to continue to turn our thanks to God and recognizing this love that has been given to us, but recognizing the thanks that comes with it as well. That because of what Christ did for us, it allows us to have this thankfulness and allowing us to be more welcomed into the family of God more freely, that we recognize that we are on an equal playing field, that we are no different, that we are in this place, that we have been restored, and that we are rejoicing in the love that God has given us, and the thankfulness that we experience allows us to truly experience what joy is. The gospel text this week is out of Luke chapter 21, verses 25 to 36. This is one of those texts where then Jesus is preparing the disciples and trying to get ahead of where they are at, recognizing that there's going to be things that are scary, things that are challenging, nations causing distress and a lot of upheaval, and do not get caught up in that. To not get caught up in the fear, to not get caught up in all these crazy things that are going on. Continue to have our eyes fixated on who God is. And we get a parable here starting in verse 29 that we can recognize that when, in this case, a fig tree starts to leaf out, that we recognize that summer is coming, that summer is near, that we are then preparing for that season. And so thus, continue to be on guard, continue to reach for God, dig into the Word, being around that, recognizing and pouring into that relationship with God. And in doing that, then we will continue to start seeing these times and learning on what God is doing and being more anticipatory on where God is taking us instead of being caught off guard. Just as we can see leaves on a fig tree or on a tree and know that summer is coming, thus we should be able to work on a relationship with God to be able to be in a similar like place, to recognize and acknowledge this changing of seasons, changing of guards, that things are starting to happen to prepare us for the next season in which we are personally moving into, or as a society we are moving into. So, before we jump into how faith and science come together this week, we do a shameless plug for Working Preacher. If you haven't checked out Working Preacher, I'd highly recommend it between their Sermon Brainwaves podcasts, their commentaries, their discussions. Since I'm not an ordained minister, I use them on a weekly basis to help give me some ideas, direction, ways to be thinking about these texts in a new and different way. Having the biblical scholars there, the history that is there, there is a lot of great resources over there. So if you haven't checked out workingpreacher.org, I'd highly recommend it. I'd also highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library. I really enjoy how they lay out the text week to week and use that on a weekly basis. But I also really enjoy how they have the art, prayers, hymns, colors, even daily devotions. These are great resources. And again, if you're listening to this podcast, remember why we're doing this. This is preparing us for the next week. Remember that then there are other resources over here at Vanderbilt's Divinity Library that can help in that preparation, that are extremely helpful to be able to get into that mindset and allow us to continue to get ready so that we can continue to grow. So if you haven't checked out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library, I'd highly recommend it. Finally, I'd also highly recommend checking out the Green Blades Reaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publication. This is either a weekly reflection or a monthly newsletter that goes through a lot of different ecological echoes, implications, and urgencies to be able to bring into the weekly lectionary, similar to this in a different focus. or being able to look at some different resources or even events that are going on in the upper Midwest to inspire, or even just to give some different ideas on how to be thinking about it from more of an ecological standpoint. So if you haven't checked out that resource down below in the show notes, in the resources section, I'd highly recommend checking out the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publication. Getting ready. I don't know about you, but I know for myself, I feel as I have gotten older, in certain ways, because there is more and more things on the to-do list to do, it gets harder and harder to do that. And especially, like I stated, I always feel that Advent into Christmas, starting at around Thanksgiving time, is a magical time when I was like a teenager. And I loved it so much, and I longed for it. And it's hard for me at the age that I'm at, knowing if it was just the political climate, the world in which we're in, or is it just becoming an older adult, that I feel at certain times that magic that kind of came, that the joy that we had, where people for a while let down their guard and seemed to care just that little bit more. And in that, we then get to the season of giving, we get to the season of recognizing and thinking about things, trying to slow down for a little while. And yet then we have this month within the church of preparation. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do we prepare for something that we know is coming? And let's be honest, it's usually very similar services for Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. We know what to expect. We know the to-do list and what to get done. But I think there is a spiritual aspect to this that we do miss, that we do misunderstand. And I think if we look to nature a little bit, I think it can help us maybe start to prepare in a different way. So let's walk through this a little bit. The different examples that I think about when I think about getting ready, like many people, is the change of seasons, at least here in the northern half of the northern hemisphere. And so you start thinking about your shoulder seasons, your spring and your fall. As I have been doing lots of little things around the house to prepare for winter. And especially in the household that I'm at, my wife originally growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, there's just certain things that she isn't as aware of that need to be done to prepare for snow to fly. And so there's definitely times where I feel that there's a lot that I need to get done. And for me, I can look at the calendar and feel that I have a general idea of what is going on. But yet, when we look to nature, that isn't exactly always the case. We've talked about before migration for birds in particular. They are looking at day length as one of the big ones that they are noticing that helps them prepare. Their hormones go down. They start to flock together and start to prepare. And what does that preparation mean? It means eating lots of food. It means getting in training flights to be able to strengthen their wings enough to be able to do that flight. And it's a challenging flight depending on the species, where to the point where potentially even breaking down their own muscle to be able to complete the whole journey, cannibalizing itself to be able to complete the journey. But there's other things that are within that migration route as well. There's a different type of trust that needs to happen. There's the trust that as they continue to fly south to wherever their winter breeding grounds are, that they're going to be there, that the habitat that they're expecting is going to be there, that the pit stops along the way are going to be there, the resources that they're needing are going to be there. And it's not like humans where we can call ahead. It's not like they have something where they can go online and check and make sure that those resources are there. They just have to trust. They have to do their part to prepare. And they lean into God, that God is going to uphold God's end of the bargain and provide. And thus, this is one of the things as humans we have learned that we need to make sure that we're doing our part in helping with this. And that's why we have some wildlife reserves and we are conscientious of different migratory routes that these birds are taking. It's so important because they need those layovers. They need those spots, both in the spring and in the fall. Let's talk about trees a little bit. We had that a little bit this week in the gospel text, talking about the fig tree and having the leaves, knowing that summer is coming. But let's think about this a little bit further. A tree starts to notice that the day length is getting shorter. So thus, it starts to go into preservation mode. It is trying to conserve energy and get ready for the fall and upcoming winter. So it starts shutting down its chlorophyll factories, and thus we get to see in many of the trees the true colors as the chlorophyll gets burned off, and seeing the reds and yellows and oranges of the different species. And what happens? They start taking all that they have, the sugars that they've been working so hard to produce, to making sure that the tree is alive, and sends it down into the roots. One, trusting that it has made enough to be able to conserve and be able to survive throughout the year. And we've talked about also how they have the communications that trees will have with each other, but also the aspect of, on the other end, knowing when to start to reawaken, to get ready for this major production time of the year. And again, if you are in North America, if you're in the upper half of North America, you know that typically between February to April, depending on the year, is a major time of year, especially for Canadian residents. It's maple syruping time. The trees are reawakening and running those sugars up and down the trees. And when they are starting to go up during the day and down at night, that is the peak time for maple syrup. But that means that it needs to be within these certain ranges, that you're having warming of upwards of 40 degrees Celsius or a couple degrees centigrade, where then it gets below freezing again at night, so that the sap runs into the roots of the tree to help preserve yet again. Thus being able to take this sap and boil it down to be able to get to the syrups or the maple candies or these different things of that nature. And you say, where's the trust in that? If you have where it starts warming super fast and the tree sends everything up and it starts to bud out, and then you get a hard freeze again, that can be very damaging to the tree. It's very risky. It's very hard on the tree. It's putting all its energy out there. It's not trying to preserve. It is trusting that the environment is ready for it to be able to move forward. As we move into this Advent season, are we truly ready to acknowledge what it means that Christ came for us? Are we really willing to sit down and acknowledge how much sacrifice God did in this process? Yes, we know the end of the story, but also thinking about that, knowing the difficulty of what Christ was to do, are we willing to then recognize our own faults and make modifications and changes within our own lives because of that? This is where Advent and Lent kind of start to blend just that little bit. Yes, there is the anticipation that we get within Advent and recognizing the hope that is coming and how joyful that is. But it's also this moment of us acknowledging and thinking about what that means for us. The love that God has for us. The way that we need to continue to lean in and be dependent on God and not get caught up in our own humanness. I think that's where it gets difficult. And I think that's where when we look at migration and we look at trees and maple syrup, the process to get to maple syrup, it's not easy. And there's just this moment where the trust is that God has me. Things are going to be okay. And I think that's a different type of preparation that we have to be willing to go into. As we move into a new church year, I think that is a different type of preparation. A different type of preparation to acknowledge that Christ did all these things to prepare to come into the world where was going to be ridiculed, was going to be human and experience humanity and all its shortfalls and highlights, and realize that there was going to be a difficult thing, and yet was willing to take that leap. And I think that's something for us that year after year, as we are moving into new church years, as we are moving into this Advent season and preparing for Christmas, are we preparing ourselves for doing this again? Are we preparing ourselves for another church year? Are we preparing ourselves for another year of faith and setting us up for that and growing in faith? Are we setting ourselves up into the challenges that are going to come and preparing ourselves so that we don't feel them as much, that we have a plan to the best of our ability? I think that's where we can learn and realize that there's this moment where we're going to do it. We're just going to do it. I think this is where an analogy I think that fits is the veteran sports athlete. Take someone like LeBron James, for instance, who has been playing for over 20 years in the NBA. And LeBron has experienced the highs and the lows and has been around the block more than a few times. But you talk and hear of any veteran athlete who has gone through it for decade plus, decade and a half, 2 decades. They talk about my body just doesn't bounce back the same way anymore. There's the grind, the gruel, the things that I know that are going to come and it's going to be difficult and hard. And I have to mentally prepare myself. I have to physically prepare myself for that. Do we take Advent to prepare ourselves for the next year? Do we get to that point where, well, as we approach Christmas, here we go. I'm taking that leap yet again. Let's learn. Let's go. Let's dig into and knowing that there's going to be hard stuff. At the end of this month will be 7 complete years of this podcast, and I would be lying to you if I was to tell you that it's all easy. There's a lot of long nights. There's a lot of difficult times. There's times where it's like, do I really want to do it this week? But I also know that there's a lot of you on the other end of this that benefit. And for me, the learning to get to that point so that I can help you continue to learn and grow is all worth it. And so all the difficulties, all the hard nights, the long nights, the frustrations, the challenges with this are all worth it for that. And I think as we are in this Advent season, and as we are preparing, I think it's worth thinking about for ourselves. How are we preparing for this next upcoming year of faith? How are we challenging ourselves to be physically, mentally, and spiritually ready for the challenges that we know are coming and the challenges that we don't know are coming? Have we built communities of faith around us to help us on this journey? Have we built routines to help us grow in the faith even when things are going well and in those difficult times? This, to me, is part of what Advent is all about. This is the joy of us recognizing how much we do need this relationship. The joy of us acknowledging and spending time with God and recognizing the beauty of God's creation, both human and non-human alike, around us. This is that time where we get to our spot of recommitting yet again. Let's go. Let's do this again. Let's take some time, and I know the Christmas season and Advent is hard sometimes, but I'm ready. I'm going to give it my best shot. I'm going to rebuckle down again. I'm going to lean in that little bit more. I'm going to lean on some people because last year was hard and there's still some things that I'm dealing with. Or there's certain things with this time of year that remind me of things of the past, and it's very difficult. But I know that God's love is going to continue to show up, and I'm going to trust in that. So the question this week is, how are you preparing for the next year of faith? How are you preparing for the next year of faith? Because I think as we go through this Advent season, it continues to build upon itself. And I think we have to have that question to start. How are we going to build, not just for the Advent season, but for the year? Because it's so important to be thinking about it on these longer scales, I argue, because that's how God works. And if we're trying to emulate and get closer to God, maybe then we need to widen our time horizons. And maybe a year is the beginning point of us to start seeing it in these longer horizons. Trees prepare, birds prepare, but there's still things they just have to trust. We have to prepare mentally, physically, and spiritually to the best of our abilities and trust that God is going to be there to help us in those difficult times and the things that we don't expect. And that's part part of what faith is all about. Recognizing and acknowledging that we have a God who fulfills promises, that continues to do what God has been saying that God's going to do for generations. So let's fulfill the calling and fulfill the things that God is calling us to do so that we can be the people that God has called us to be the best body of Christ that we have all been called to be. So we'll wrap this up as we always do. I pray God blesses you through your faith and amazes you through science.